You know, there's this specific kind of silence that happens when you walk into a room and everyone pretends they aren't looking at you. It's heavy, almost suffocating. Like the air suddenly gets too thick to breathe, and for 3 years. That silence was the only thing Elena Vance knew. She lived in the shadows of Seattle, a city that already feels like it's perpetually under a gray blanket, and honestly, the weather suited her just fine because sunshine feels aggressive when you're trying to disappear. Elena used to be an artist, the kind who saw colors where other people just saw gray concrete. She'd spend hours mixing oils to get the exact shade of a stranger's laugh, or the melancholy blue of a rainy Tuesday. But that was before the fire, before the night the wiring in her cheap apartment complex gave up the ghost and took everything with it. And I mean everything: her portfolio, her mother, and the face she used to see in the mirror. Now at 26, she was a librarian who worked in the archives. The basement level where the fluorescent lights hummed and nobody came down unless they were lost. Wrapped in oversized scarves that covered the right side of her face, hiding the thick, rippled burn scars that mapped out the worst night of her life. So when her therapist, a woman with the patience of a saint, finally pushed her into accepting a blind date, it felt less like a romantic opportunity and more like a walk to the gallows. Elena sat in the corner booth of the Velvet Cork, a wine bar chosen specifically for its terrible lighting. Her hands shaking so bad, she had to clasp them tight around her water glass, just waiting for the inevitable rejection. Rehearsing the exit line she'd used 12 times in her head. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well." Simple, clean, cowardly. Then the door opened, and in walked Jack Miller, looking like he'd just run a marathon through a hurricane. Jack wasn't the smooth, polished type she expected from the dating app description her sister wrote. He was rough around the edges, wearing a jacket that had seen better days, carrying the distinct scent of rain and motor oil. But the kicker, the absolute deal-breaker standing right next to him, was a 6-year-old girl in a bright yellow raincoat holding a plastic dinosaur. Jack looked terrified, scanning the room until his eyes landed on the woman in the scarf. And he approached the table like he was walking into a minefield, apologizing before he even sat down, explaining in this rush of words that his babysitter bailed. His sister was working a double shift at the and he couldn't cancel because he's a man of his word. So here was Sophie, and please don't leave. Elena froze, her eyes darting between the man and the child. Because kids are the worst kind of mirrors. They don't have social filters. They don't know how to look away politely. Sophie climbed into the booth, clutched her dinosaur, and stared just a pure, unadulterated stare, and Elena felt the panic rising in her throat like bile, instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to get back to the safety of her basement. "I can't do this," Elena whispered, her voice barely scratching the surface of the noise in the bar. But before she could stand, Sophie pointed a small, chubby finger directly at Elena's face and asked the question that sucks the air out of the room. "Does it hurt?" Not what happened, not "you look scary," just, "Does it hurt?" It was innocent, but to Elena, it felt like a slap. The shame crashed over her, hot and visceral, triggering the memory of the heat, the smoke, the feeling of her skin failing her. And she stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floorboards, drawing the attention of half the bar. "Don't look," she choked out, the tears already hot behind her eyes. "I'm disgusting." And she ran. She didn't walk, she bolted, out the door into the drizzling rain, desperate to put distance between herself and the humiliation of being seen. Jack didn't think, he just reacted. He was a guy who fixed things for a living. HVAC systems, broken furnaces, things that made noise and heat. But he'd spent 5 years unable to fix the hole his wife's death left in his life. And seeing Elena run, seeing that raw, naked pain, it triggered something in him. He looked at the bartender, a guy he knew from high school, and said, "Watch Sophie. 2 minutes, I swear. and he ran out into the wet street. He found her half a block down, tucked into the doorway of a closed bookstore, shaking so hard it looked like she was convulsing, trying to fix her scarf with hands that wouldn't cooperate. "Go away," she sobbed, pressing her back against the brick, trying to make herself small. "Just go back to your normal life and leave the monster alone." Jack slowed down, catching his breath, raising his hands like he was approaching a frightened animal. He didn't offer a tissue. He didn't say, "It's okay," because it clearly wasn't. Instead, he stepped into her personal space, not aggressively, but firmly, blocking the wind, blocking the view of the passersby. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that cuts through panic. "And my daughter didn't ask because she was scared. She asked because she's 6 and she knows what hurt looks like." Elena looked up, her mascara running, the scarf falling away to reveal the angry, textured skin that ran from her cheek down her neck, the sight that usually sent men running or stammering fake excuses. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't do that little which people do where they look at your good eye and refuse to acknowledge the rest. He looked right at the scar, then he looked right into her eyes, and he did something that defied every rule of a first date. Hell, every rule of social interaction. He reached out, his hands rough and warm, and gently moved the wet hair sticking to her cheek. "I see you," he whispered, and he leaned in, pressing a soft, deliberate kiss right on the ridge of the scar tissue on her cheekbone. It wasn't romantic in the movie sense. It was grounding, a transfer of strength, a declaration that he wasn't afraid of the fire that had consumed her. Elena stopped breathing for a second, the shock overriding the panic, because nobody, absolutely nobody, had touched her there in 3 years without wearing latex gloves. "I'm not scared, Elena," Jack said, pulling back just enough to see her eyes. "I've seen ugly things in this world, and this isn't one of them. You're just a survivor. I know what survivors look like." He didn't wait for a response, just gave her a nod, told her he had to get back to Sophie, and walked away, leaving her standing in the rain with a burning sensation on her cheek that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the fact that for the first time in 1,000 days, she felt human. But life, as it turns out, has a wicked sense of humor. Because while that moment was private, the world we live in is not. 2 tables away from them at the wine bar sat Kylie West, a mid-tier influencer who monetized drama for a living, phone propped up against a napkin holder, recording the whole freak out for her story. By the time Elena got home, wet and emotionally exhausted, her phone was already buzzing. The video was titled "Blind Date Nightmare, Monster Meltdown," and it showed everything: the chair screeching, the "I'm disgusting" line, the frantic running. The comments were exactly what you'd expect from the cesspool of the internet. "Yikes. Run, bro. Why is she even trying to date?" Elena sat on her bathroom floor, reading them until her vision blurred, feeling the progress of the night shatter into a million jagged pieces. She blocked Jack's number immediately, convinced he was part of it, or at least that he'd see it and realize the charity case wasn't worth the baggage. Jack, meanwhile, was fighting a different battle. He saw the video the next morning when a coworker showed him in the break room, laughing about dodging a bullet. Jack nearly put his fist through a locker. He didn't see a monster. He saw a woman in pain being exploited for clicks. He messaged the influencer, demanding she take it down, appealing to basic human decency, which was his first mistake because people like Kylie don't speak decency. They speak engagement metrics. She refused, citing public domain and blocking him. That's when Jack realized this wasn't something he could fix with a wrench and some duct tape. This required a different kind of pressure. He showed up at Elena's apartment that evening, not to ask for a second date, but to show her the cease and desist letter his cousin, a paralegal, had drafted. Elena wouldn't open the door at first. Speaking through the chain lock, telling him to leave her alone. That she was done being a spectacle. "I'm not here to date you, Elena," Jack said through the crack. "I'm here because I'm pissed off. You don't deserve this. And my daughter, Sophie, drew you a picture. She thinks you're a superhero. She calls you the Lightning Lady." He slid a piece of paper under the door. It was a crayon drawing of a woman with a bright yellow zigzag across her face, standing on top of a mountain. Elena looked at it, looked at the jagged line that was meant to be her scar, and for the first time, she didn't see disfigurement. She saw power. She opened the door. That night, sitting on her mismatched thrift store couch, drinking cheap tea, the dynamic shifted. It wasn't a romance yet. It was an alliance. Jack, with his logical, mechanical brain, started asking questions about the fire. He was looking at the old news reports on his phone while Elena paced. "It says here it was an electrical fault in the sub-basement," Jack muttered, zooming in on a blurry photo of the burnt-out breaker box. "But looking at this, the burn pattern is wrong. And the fire suppression system didn't trigger until the 3rd floor. That's impossible unless the dampers were manually welded shut." Elena stopped pacing. "What are you talking about?" "I work on these systems, Elena," Jack said, his eyes narrowing. Fire safety, it's all connected. If the dampers were working, the smoke wouldn't have reached your mother's floor that fast. Someone tampered with this building to save money on heating costs. This wasn't an accident. It was negligence. The air in the room changed. Suddenly, Elena wasn't just a victim of fate. She was a victim of a crime. A name surfaced in the articles: Marcus Thorne, the landlord. A man who is currently rebranding himself as a philanthropist and running for city council on a platform of urban renewal. The rage that flared up in Elena wasn't the hot, panic-induced shame she was used to. This was cold, hard, and focused. They decided to dig. Jack had access to city blueprints through his job, and Elena had the archival skills to find the permits that were never filed. But poking a bear like Marcus Thorne comes with consequences. A week later, after they'd been seen asking questions at the city planning office, the threat started. First, it was subtle: a brick through Jack's truck window. Then, Elena got a text from an unknown number: "Stop looking at the ashes or you'll get burned again." It terrified her, absolutely, but it also confirmed they were right. The breaking point came when Jack went to pick up Sophie from school, and the teacher told him a nice man from the city had stopped by to ask verify Sophie's emergency contact info. That was it. That was the line. Jack showed up at Elena's place that night, vibrating with anger, a tire iron in his truck bed, ready to go do something stupid. "We stop," Jack said, pacing her living room. "They know about Sophie. I can't risk her." "I'm sorry, Elena, I can't." Elena looked at him, looked at this man who had kissed her scar and made her feel human, and she saw the terror in his eyes, not for himself, but for his child. And she realized that for 3 years, she had been waiting for someone to save her. But right now, he needed her to be the brave one. "We don't stop," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "But we don't fight them in the alleys. We fight them in the light. Thorne is hosting that gala tomorrow night, right? The new Seattle fundraiser? He's going to be there. The press is going to be there. And guess who else? Kylie West. She's live streaming the event. You want to crash a billionaire's party?" Jack asked, incredulous. "I don't want to crash it," Elena said, walking over to the mirror and pulling the scarf off her neck, letting it drop to the floor. "I want to be the guest of honor." "You said you weren't scared, Jack. Prove it. Walk in there with me." The gala was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont, a place dripping in crystal and pretension, filled with the kind of people who think buying a $5,000 table counts as community service. Marcus Thorne was center stage, looking every inch the benevolent leader, talking about safety and family values, while the crowd applauded politely. In the back, Kylie West was doing her thing, holding up her phone, live streaming to her 100,000 followers, making snarky comments about the odds. Security was tight, but Jack knew the building. He'd serviced the ventilation units a year ago. He got them in through the catering entrance, navigating the back corridors with the confidence of a man who owns a clipboard. Leading Elena toward the ballroom. Elena was wearing a dress she hadn't touched in 4 years. A deep emerald green that caught the light. But more importantly, she wasn't wearing a scarf. Her hair was pulled back. The scar was there, stark and red against the pale skin of her neck and cheek, a map of violence on display for the world. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, every instinct screaming at her to cover up, to run, to hide in the dark. But she looked at Jack, who squeezed her hand so hard his knuckles were white, and she remembered the lightning lady drawing folded in her purse. She remembered her mother's voice screaming for her to run. She stepped into the light. The room didn't go silent immediately. It was a ripple effect. People turned, whispered, nudged each other. Is that her? The girl from the video? The murmurs grew until they reached the stage. Marcus Thorne faltered mid-sentence, shielding his eyes against the spotlight to see the disturbance. Elena walked straight down the center aisle. She didn't look down. She locked eyes with Thorne. Mr. Thorne, her voice rang out, surprisingly steady, projecting the way she used to when she defended her art critiques. You're talking about safety. That's funny. Because 3 years ago, you saved $12,000 by welding the fire dampers shut at the Bayside Apartments. The silence now was absolute. Thorne laughed, a nervous, dismissive chuckle. I'm sorry, miss, you're clearly upset. Security. I have the blueprints, Jack shouted, stepping up beside her. Holding up a tablet connected to the room's main projector, another little trick he'd managed to rig from the control booth access. And I have the invoices from the contractor you paid to bypass the code inspections. Suddenly, the giant screen behind Thorne, which was displaying his campaign logo, flickered and changed. It showed the documents, the signatures, the undeniable proof that he had turned a building into a kill to save a few bucks. The crowd gasped. But the real dagger came when Elena turned, not to Thorne, but to Kylie West, who was standing there, phone still recording. Mouth agape. And you, Elena said, walking right up to the camera lens, her scarred face filling the frame of thousands of screens. You wanted a monster for your viewers? Here I am. But the monster isn't the one with the scars. It's the people who create them to save a dime, and the people who mock them to make $1. Take a good look, Kylie. This is what survival looks like. It's ugly, it's painful, and it's real. Are you filming this? Make sure you get the good side. She turned her scarred cheek fully to the camera, unflinching, regal in her brokenness. Thorne tried to leave the stage, but the spell was broken. Journalists were already shouting questions. The flashbulbs that used to terrify Elena were now documenting Thorne's panic. Police, who had been tipped off by the fire marshal Jack had contacted earlier, were waiting at the exits. It was chaos, beautiful, vindicating chaos. Later that night, outside on the hotel steps, the adrenaline finally crashed. Elena sat on the cold concrete, shivering, the emerald dress providing zero warmth against the Seattle night. Jack sat next to her, draping his jacket over her shoulders. They didn't speak for a long time. They just watched the police lights reflect off the wet pavement. You were terrifying in there, Jack said, handing her a bottle of water he'd swiped from the bar. I think I was a little scared of you. Elena laughed, a cracked, tired sound. I was terrified. I thought I was going to pass out. But you didn't, Jack said. He reached out and took her hand, tracing the veins on her wrist. You stood tall. Sophie is going to lose her mind when I tell her. The legal fallout was messy. Justice in the real world isn't a gavel bang and a fade to black. Thorne had lawyers, he had connections, and the trial dragged on for months. He didn't go to prison for life. He got 5 years for involuntary manslaughter and fraud, which felt like an insult compared to the lives he took, but his reputation was incinerated. He was bankrupt, ruined, a pariah. It wasn't perfect, but it was accountability. As for Elena, the viral fame shifted. Sure, the trolls were still there because the internet is a dumpster fire, but the narrative changed. #Lightning Lady became a thing. People started sharing their own stories of scars, of hiding, of survival. Elena quit the archives. She rented a small studio with huge windows, no more basements. She started painting again, but not the pretty landscape she used to do. She painted portraits of people the world tried to look away from: burn survivors, veterans with missing limbs, women with mastectomies. She painted them in bright, violent, beautiful colors, forcing the viewer to acknowledge their humanity. And Jack? Jack didn't magically fix his grief. He still had days where he missed his wife so much it hurt to breathe. But he stopped hiding in his routine. He started taking weekends off. He started hiking again, usually with a little girl running ahead and a woman with a scarred face lagging behind. Complaining about the incline, one afternoon. About a year later, they were sitting in Jack's living room. Sophie was asleep on the rug. Elena was sketching in a notebook. Jack was watching her, just looking, studying the way the light hit the textured skin on her neck. "What?" Elena asked, not looking up. "Nothing," Jack said, smiling. "Just thinking about that first date." "Worst date of my life." Elena snorted. "You brought a child and a plastic dinosaur. You set the bar pretty low." "I brought a dinosaur," Jack corrected, "and I kissed the girl." "You kissed the scar," she said softly, finally looking at him. "Same thing," Jack shrugged. "It's all you. The smooth parts, the rough parts. It's just you, and that's the truth of it, isn't it? We spend so much time trying to present this polished, filtered version of ourselves to the world, terrified that if anyone saw the cracks, they'd run. We think love is about finding someone who thinks we're perfect. But maybe, just maybe, love is finding someone who sees the damage, sees the history, and pulls up a chair because they know that's where the real story is. So, I've got to ask you guys something, and be honest in the comments. We live in a world where everyone has a camera in their pocket, ready to record someone's worst moment for a laugh. If you saw someone like Elena having a breakdown in public, would you help? Or would you pull out your phone? And more importantly, what are the scars you are hiding because you think they make you unlovable? Because let me tell you, from where I'm sitting, those are the most interesting parts of you. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like and share if this story hit home. See you in the next one.